Seattle was drowning in rain the night Ethan Cole found the truth. The kind of rain that blurred everything: the skyline, the glass towers, even the line between rage and heartbreak. He'd returned home earlier than usual, his camera still hanging from his shoulder, the metallic scent of the storm clinging to his jacket. The city outside hummed traffic, sirens, a distant echo of life. While inside his apartment, everything felt unnervingly still. Olivia's laughter broke that stillness. It was soft, familiar, intimate, a sound that once made him feel like the world was right. But tonight, it came from behind a half-closed bedroom door, mixed with a voice that wasn't his. Ethan froze. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. Then came the whisper, low, male, unmistakable. His hand tightened around the camera strap until his knuckles went white. He pushed the door open an inch, just enough to see the silhouette of two bodies tangled in a moment that would replay in his mind for years to come. Her hair spilled across the sheets, golden under the dim lamplight. Her back arched slightly, the same curve he used to trace with his fingertips. And then the name. His name spoken by her, but meant for someone else. He didn't say a word. Ethan stepped back, his breath shallow, the walls around him closing in. 1,000 images flashed through his mind: their first trip to Oregon, her laugh when he'd spilled coffee on himself, the way she used to fall asleep against his chest. Love, routine, trust all shattered in an instant. He left the apartment quietly, like a ghost slipping out of its own body. The rain hit him hard, cold and punishing. He walked aimlessly through the streets, past the coffee shop they used to visit every Sunday, past the pier where he'd proposed under string lights. The city lights blurred in his vision until they became streaks of gold and red. By midnight, he had reached the edge of Elliott Bay. The wind smelled of salt and decay. Ethan stood there, drenched, staring at the dark water. He imagined walking straight into it, disappearing beneath the black surface until the world forgot he ever existed. For a fleeting second, it felt almost peaceful. Instead, he turned away. The next morning, his car was found near the waterfront. His camera bag sat on the passenger seat, his wallet inside. The police suspected suicide. Friends whispered that fame had broken him, that maybe he couldn't handle the pressure anymore. The newspapers printed his photograph: missing photographer, Ethan Cole, presumed dead. Olivia sat in the living room when they told her. She didn't cry at first. She simply nodded, her face pale and unreadable. But when the officer left, she walked into their bedroom, the same one where betrayal had bloomed and collapsed on the floor. For days she stayed there, surrounded by the faint scent of hymn's cedarwood cologne, film chemicals, and the faint musk of old paper. His clothes still hung in the closet. His camera lenses were neatly arranged on the shelf, each one labeled in his careful handwriting. Everything screamed his presence, yet he was gone. Guilt became her shadow. She tried to go back to work at the law firm, but her hands trembled every time she picked up a file. She couldn't sleep without waking from dreams of him standing at the edge of the sea, calling her name, then vanishing into the mist. The man she'd betrayed called her from every reflection, every silence. Months passed. The man she'd cheated with tried to reach out, but Olivia couldn't stand the sight of him. He was the embodiment of everything she'd destroyed. One evening, she threw her phone into the sink and watched it sink under soapy water, bubbles rising like confessions. She started visiting the pier every Sunday, wearing the same coat Ethan used to love, gray wool, too big for her frame. She would sit there for hours, waiting for something she couldn't name. Sometimes she brought flowers. Sometimes she brought one of his photographs, the one of the Oregon coast at sunset, his favorite shot. She'd hold it until her fingers went numb from the cold. Seattle moved on. People forgot. But Olivia couldn't. At night, she wrote him letters she never sent. Ethan, I see you in every storm. I hear your voice in every gust of wind that rattles the windows. If you're out there, I deserve your silence. But if you're gone, then I deserve to drown with you. She hid those letters in the box where his negatives used to be, wrapped in film rolls like secrets. One morning, nearly a year later, Olivia woke to sunlight for the first time in months. The rain had stopped, and the city was washed clean. She stood by the window, clutching one of Ethan's old photographs, a self-portrait he'd taken on the balcony, smiling faintly, eyes bright with something she hadn't seen in herself for a long time: peace. And in that fragile moment, she realized something terrible. Ethan hadn't just left her. He had erased himself. No trace, no forwarding address, no goodbye. Just absence, sharper than any blade. Olivia pressed the photograph to her chest and whispered into the empty apartment, "You win." But somewhere, hundreds of miles away, in a coastal town where fog swallowed the mornings and gulls cried over the cliffs, a man named Ethan Cole was alive. He had a new name now, a new life, and a heart rebuilt from silence. Yet every night, as he developed his photos in a dim red light, he'd see her face appear faintly in the film, blurred, ghost-like, reaching out from the frame. He told himself it was just a trick of memory, but deep down, he knew he had never really left her. The coastal town of Astoria woke each morning beneath a veil of fog, the kind that clung to rooftops and blurred the edges of the sea. Ethan, now calling himself Daniel Reeves, had learned to love that fog. It was merciful, concealing everything, softening the sharp outlines of memory. He rented a small house on a hill overlooking the Columbia River. The shingles were weathered, the windows drafty, but it was quiet. Every dawn, the low cry of gulls echoed through the mist, and the distant hum of the fishing boats rose from the harbor. It was a sound that grounded him, simple and real, unlike the chaos of his old life in Seattle. Each morning followed a pattern. He brewed black coffee in a chipped ceramic mug, set his camera bag by the door, and walked to the edge of town where the cliffs met the ocean. There, he took photographs of waves colliding with stone, light fracturing through salt spray, or the silhouettes of fishermen mending nets. Nature didn't betray. It only repeated itself, patient and endless. The locals knew him only as Daniel, the quiet photographer, who sometimes sold prints at the weekend market. He rarely spoke beyond small talk, a nod to the grocer, a polite morning to the barista. He lived deliberately invisible, the way one breathes carefully after a long illness. But at night, when the fog thickened and the town fell silent, Ethan's new identity began to fray. The dreams came, always the same. Olivia standing by the pier in Seattle, her hair soaked from the rain, eyes searching the water for him. Sometimes she called his name. Other times, she just stared as the tide rose around her. He'd wake drenched in sweat, the echo of her voice still trembling in his ears. He would lie there, staring at the ceiling until dawn, convincing himself she wasn't real anymore, that the Olivia who betrayed him had died along with the man he once was. Yet when the first light touched the curtains, he'd catch himself whispering her name, barely audible, as though afraid the walls might remember. One afternoon, while developing photos in his darkroom, Ethan caught his reflection in the red glow. The man staring back seemed older than 34. His beard had grown in unevenly, streaked with early gray. There was a stillness in his eyes he didn't recognize, an exhaustion that came not from work, but from trying too hard to forget. He printed a photo of the sea waves collapsing into one another under a bruised sky. The shot was perfect, balanced, and cold. He pinned it to the wall beside dozens of others. Each photograph, in its own way, was a piece of the silence he was building around himself. At the local cafe, people sometimes asked where he came from. He always smiled faintly and said, "Everywhere and nowhere." They would laugh, assuming he was being poetic. He wasn't. One woman, in particular, had begun to notice him. Her name was Mara, the cafe owner, mid-30s, with wind-tangled hair and a voice as gentle as the tide. She never pried. Instead, she offered warmth in small gestures, a free refill, a quiet smile, a question left half unasked. "You always sit by the window," she said one gray morning, placing a fresh cup before him. "Waiting for something?" He looked at the sea beyond the glass. "Maybe light," he said. "Maybe nothing." She nodded, as if she understood, and perhaps she did. Small towns collected the broken in ways cities never could. Despite himself, Ethan found comfort in those brief exchanges. A fragile normalcy began to form a rhythm. Work, sea, coffee, sleep. Yet every time he caught Mara watching him with cautious curiosity, he felt the faint sting of guilt. He knew what happened when someone tried to love a man full of ghosts. One evening, after a long day shooting for a local magazine, Ethan sat on the porch with a bottle of bourbon. The sun was sinking, bleeding crimson into the horizon. The air smelled of rain and pine. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember the warmth of Olivia's hand on his chest, her laughter against his ear, the way she used to whisper, "Promise me you'll never disappear." He took another drink, closing his eyes. The sound of waves grew louder, merging with memory. Sometimes he wondered what she had done after he left. Did she grieve? Did she move on? Was she even alive? He told himself it didn't matter. Yet beneath that self-imposed indifference, something pulsed, a fragile, persistent ache, like a heartbeat under a scar. Weeks blurred into months. Winter settled in. The sea turned steel gray, and storms rolled in from the Pacific, shaking the house at night. Ethan worked more, capturing the fury of the weather, the violence of waves, the isolation of the coastline. His photographs grew darker, more haunting. The local magazine published a feature calling his work a study in absence. The title made him laugh bitterly. One night, while sorting negatives, he found a forgotten roll of film wedged behind a drawer. It was from Seattle. He hadn't meant to bring it. His hands trembled as he loaded it into the projector. Images flickered across the Wall Street corners. Rainy windows, Olivia's face mid-laugh. Her eyes alive, unguarded. He turned off the machine abruptly, heart pounding. The silence afterward was suffocating. He pressed his palms to his face, trying to erase her from his mind. But the images had already returned to life inside him. He realized then that all his photographs, the storms, the fog, the empty beaches, were not about nature. They were about her absence, about the shape she'd left behind. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked down to the cliffs, wind tearing at his coat, the ocean raging below. "You don't exist anymore," he whispered into the darkness. "You don't." But the sea, vast and merciless, gave no answer. Only the sound of waves crashing against rock, steady, relentless, eternal. The next morning, he developed another photograph. In the print, through the haze of fog and sea spray, a faint silhouette appeared, indistinct, almost human, standing on the distant shore. Ethan stared at it for a long time. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure whether he'd captured a trick of light or a ghost finally finding its way back to him. The rain had returned to Astoria, soft and endless, veiling the town in a melancholy haze. The annual Coastal Art Exhibition was held inside an old cannery warehouse near the harbor brick walls, damp with salt, strings of amber lights swaying from the rafters. It was the first time Ethan, under his alias Daniel Reeves, had agreed to display his work publicly. He told himself it was for practical reasons: exposure, a modest income, perhaps even closure. But deep down, he wanted to see if the world could look at his pain and call it beautiful. Dozens of his photographs lined the walls, seascapes bathed in mist, lonely piers swallowed by fog, empty chairs beside unmade beds. They were fragments of silence, each one whispering something he could never say aloud. Visitors murmured softly as they moved through the gallery, wine glasses in hand, their reflections shifting across the glossy prints. Ethan stood near the back, hands tucked into the pockets of his dark coat, his expression unreadable. He hated crowds, yet there was something hypnotic about watching strangers interpret his ghosts. A woman paused before one of his largest prints, a shot of the ocean at dawn, faint sunlight trembling through gray waves, and whispered, "It feels like loss." He almost smiled. She was right. He was reaching for another glass of wine when the air in the room seemed to shift, an invisible change in temperature, in gravity, in pulse. He turned slightly, and for the first time in 3 years, saw her. Olivia. She stood near the entrance, hesitant, as if unsure she had the right to be there. Her hair, once honey blonde, was darker now, streaked with shadows. A long beige coat clung to her, damp from the rain. She looked older, thinner, the kind of fragile beauty that came from carrying too much sorrow. But her eyes were still the same shade of restless gray he had memorized and sworn to forget. For a long suspended moment, neither moved. The room dissolved around them, the chatter, the music, the lights all fading into a dull hum. It was as though time itself had recoiled, forcing them back into the silence of that last night in Seattle. Olivia's breath caught. She whispered something under it. Perhaps his name, perhaps only a prayer. Ethan felt his chest tighten until it hurt to breathe. He turned away, but she moved toward him, slowly, as though crossing a field of broken glass. The click of her heels echoed unnaturally loud against the wooden floor. When she finally stood before him, the space between them was barely an arm's length, yet it felt like a lifetime. Ethan. The name trembled out of her, soft, unbelieving. He said nothing. His throat felt scraped raw. "I thought you were dead." Her voice cracked. "Who looked for you everywhere?" The words should have angered him, but instead they hollowed him out. He studied her face, the faint lines near her eyes, the quiver of her mouth, and for a brief, unbearable instant, he saw the woman he had loved before everything shattered. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I didn't know you'd be here. I saw your name, Daniel Reeves, in an article about this exhibition. I thought it couldn't be you, but—" She trailed off, her gaze flicking toward the photographs on the wall. "It was your light. I recognized it. You always captured light like it was something holy." He almost laughed, but the sound never came. "That man you're talking about doesn't exist anymore." Olivia shook her head, tears catching in her lashes. "You can erase a name, Ethan, but not the soul behind it. I've seen your work. Every frame is you, the silence, the loneliness, the ache. It's all there." He felt exposed, suddenly, as if she had peeled back the thin skin he'd built over his grief. "Why are you here?" he asked. She hesitated, swallowing hard. "Because I never stopped trying to find you. Not to ask for forgiveness, I know I don't deserve that, but to tell you, I'm sorry for everything." Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. The apology landed softly, yet it split something open inside him. "You destroyed me," he said, his voice low, trembling. "And then you expect sorry to fix that?" "No," she whispered. "I expect it to hurt." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid, the years lost, the nights haunted, the love that had decayed but never truly died. He wanted to walk away, to vanish again, to retreat to the silence of his fog and solitude. But instead, his eyes wandered to the photograph behind her, one he had taken just months ago. A woman's silhouette standing by the sea, almost swallowed by mist. Olivia turned, following his gaze. She drew in a sharp breath. "That's me," she said, almost inaudible. "Isn't it?" Ethan looked at her, startled. "What are you talking about?" "I used to go to the pier in Seattle," she said softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Every Sunday. I thought if I sat there long enough, you might come back. Someone once took a picture of me from far away. I didn't think much of it then. But now, I see it. You were watching me." Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. He remembered that day how he had returned to the city briefly, hidden under a hood, unable to resist the pull of memory. He had seen her sitting alone by the water, holding one of his photographs in her hands. He had lifted his camera almost involuntarily. It was the last image he had taken before truly disappearing. "I didn't mean for you to find it," he murmured. Her eyes met his, shining through tears. "But I was meant to." The curator's voice broke the silence, announcing closing time, but neither of them moved. The other guests filtered out, their laughter fading into the drizzle outside, until only the two of them remained beneath the hanging lights. Olivia took a small step closer. "You can hate me," she said. "You can send me away. But please don't pretend you're free of me." Ethan felt his defenses falter, the years of silence unraveling like thread. He could smell her again, faint perfume, rain, the ghost of home. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to reach out, to touch her, to believe that time hadn't turned them into strangers. But then he saw the pain in her eyes and realized they were bound, not by love anymore, but by ruin. He turned toward the door. "You found me, Olivia," he said quietly, "but I don't know what's left for you to find." And with that, he walked out into the rain, leaving her standing among the ghosts of his photographs, surrounded by the evidence of a man who had once loved her more than life itself and had spent every day since trying to forget how. The rain had not stopped for days. It swept in from the Pacific in long gray ribbons, tapping against the windows of Ethan's small house as though the world outside wanted to be let in. He sat by the window, watching the water crawl down the glass, a mug of coffee growing cold beside him. Every sound felt sharper since that night at the exhibition, the creak of the floorboards, the distant cry of gulls, even the whisper of his own breathing. He hadn't expected to see her again. He thought she'd take the hint, return to whatever life she had left behind in Seattle. But 3 mornings later, her car appeared at the foot of his driveway, the same silver sedan he used to wash on Sundays, back when life was still intact. She stepped out into the mist, her coat pulled tight around her. Her face looked pale, her expression uncertain, yet there was a resolve in her eyes that unsettled him. She was trembling, though not entirely from the cold. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. "You shouldn't have come," he said. His voice carried no warmth, just the dull fatigue of a man who'd already fought this war within himself 100 times. "I know," Olivia replied, her tone low, "but you didn't let me finish that night. There's nothing left to finish." "Please," she whispered, "just one conversation. After that, I'll leave." He hesitated. For a moment he thought about closing the door, retreating back into the safety of silence. But something in her eyes, exhaustion maybe, or a truth long buried, stopped him. He stepped aside. The air between them thickened as she walked in. The house smelled faintly of cedar and developing chemicals. Photographs lined the walls, all grayscale, all distant. She paused by one, a shot of the ocean under a broken sky, and traced the frame with her fingers. "You still chase the storm," she said softly. "I don't chase anything," he replied. "It just finds me." She turned to him then, her expression almost pleading. "Ethan, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need you to understand why I did what I did." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a wall of indifference he didn't entirely feel. "There's no reason good enough, Olivia." She flinched, but didn't look away. "You think it was about desire, about something simple. It wasn't. It was emptiness." Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "You remember how my job was back then, 12-hour days, the endless cases, the clients who thought they owned me. I was drowning. And you—" She stopped, struggling for words. "You were slipping away into your work too. Every day you left earlier, came home later, you'd sit behind that camera like it was a shield. We stopped talking. I'd look at you and feel like you were somewhere I couldn't reach." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you filled that space with someone else?" "I filled it with noise," she said quietly. "With a mistake that made me feel seen for 5 minutes. I hated myself even while it was happening. I kept telling myself I'd stop, that I'd come back to you and fix it. But I didn't know how." Her eyes glistened. "And then you found out. And you vanished. You didn't even let me try." "Try?" His voice cracked, the calm surface breaking. "You broke everything, Olivia. Every promise, every bit of trust. You didn't just cheat, you ended us." Her tears came then, silent at first, sliding down her cheeks as she whispered, "You think I don't know that? I've lived with it every day since. The man I betrayed, he's dead, Ethan. The one standing here is someone I killed." Ethan turned away, his hands trembling. He wanted to stay angry. Anger was safe. Anger didn't ache. But beneath the rage was something raw, a memory that refused to die. He remembered her asleep beside him, her breath soft against his neck. The nights she'd wait up for him, pretending not to, the way she'd trace his scars with gentle fingers and call them stories. He closed his eyes. "You don't get to rewrite the past, Ethan," he said. "You don't get to walk back into my life and pretend there's something left to salvage." "I'm not pretending," she said. I needed you to know that it wasn't about love. I never stopped loving you, Ethan. I just stopped loving myself." Her words struck him like a slow-moving blade. He wanted to reject them, to call her a liar, but the exhaustion in her voice made it impossible. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the remnants of the woman he once knew buried beneath guilt and regret. "You talk about emptiness," he said softly. "But do you have any idea what it's like to wake up and realize the person you loved most made you disappear? To have your whole life erased because someone couldn't bear their own silence?" "I do," she said, almost in a whisper. "Because you did the same to me when you left." The room fell quiet. Rain pressed harder against the windows, the wind keening through the eaves like a confession neither of them wanted to hear. Ethan stared at the floor, his heart thudding dully against his ribs. She was right, in a way that hurt more than any lie. He had punished her by becoming a ghost. He walked to the window, needing space, needing air. "I thought leaving would fix me," he said finally, "but all it did was turn the pain into a habit." Olivia stepped closer, her reflection joining his in the glass, two shadows blurred by rain. "You think you're the only one haunted?" she asked softly. "Every night I hear your voice. Every time I win a case. Every time I see the ocean, I hear you. You said once that photographs steal pieces of time. Maybe that's what happened. You took mine." He turned to her, his expression unreadable, his voice low. "Don't make this poetry, Olivia. It's not beautiful. It's broken." "I know," she whispered, "but it's all I have left of you." Something inside him cracked, quiet and invisible, like a lens fracturing from within. He saw the exhaustion in her, the wreckage of choices that could never be undone. And still, against reason, against logic, a part of him wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to believe that love could somehow outlast betrayal. But he didn't. Instead, he said, "You should go." Olivia nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I will." She hesitated, then added, "But if you ever want to stop running, I'll be here not to fix us, just to remember." She turned and walked toward the door, her footsteps soft against the wooden floor. When it closed behind her, Ethan exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and heartbreak. He looked again at the rain outside, the endless gray stretching beyond the horizon. In its rhythm, he heard the echo of her words, "I never stopped loving you. I just stopped loving myself." For a long time, he stood there in silence, unsure whether what filled his chest was forgiveness or the absence of it. The days that followed unfolded like a strange dream, quiet, hesitant, filled with pauses that seemed to stretch for miles. Olivia did not leave town after that conversation. Ethan saw her car sometimes at the edge of the harbor, parked near the old cafe where they used to spend their Sunday mornings. She never approached, never called, but her presence lingered, faint as the scent of rain that refused to leave the air. One morning, he found her sitting alone at a small table by the window of that same cafe. The world outside was swallowed by fog. The ocean was only a gray suggestion, and the gulls cried like distant ghosts. She looked up when he entered, surprise flashing across her face, quickly replaced by something gentler, hope, maybe, or relief. "Ethan," she said softly. He hesitated in the doorway, uncertain why his feet had brought him there. He could have turned back, disappeared again into his solitude. But something inside him, flicker of the man he once was, urged him forward. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Her smile was small but real. "Please." They sat across from each other. The waitress brought 2 coffees, as if memory itself had whispered the order. For a while, they didn't speak. The sound of rain against the glass filled the silence between them, and in that quiet, something fragile began to breathe again. When Olivia finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to see you." "Neither did I," Ethan said. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the years between them disappeared. They were back in that tiny apartment, laughing over burnt pancakes and unwashed dishes, planning trips they never took. He remembered how she used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the same gesture she made now. He looked away, unsettled by how easily memory could resurrect what he'd tried so hard to bury. Over the following weeks, they began to speak more. Their meetings were accidental at first, then deliberate. She would bring him lunch while he worked on his photographs at the studio. Sometimes, he would stop by her new office, bringing her the coffee she liked, black with a hint of cinnamon. They talked about everything except the years between them: art, the ocean, the books they used to read aloud at night. Slowly, the sharpness in his chest dulled, replaced by a cautious warmth he didn't trust. One evening, Olivia suggested they walk by the shore. The fog had rolled in thick and low, turning the coastline into a dreamscape. The tide whispered at their feet, pulling ribbons of foam back into the sea. Ethan walked beside her, hands buried in his coat pockets, eyes on the shifting horizon. Olivia's scarf fluttered in the wind, brushing against his arm now and then. "It's strange," she said, her voice muffled by the fog. "How the ocean never changes, and yet it's never the same twice." Ethan glanced at her. "Maybe it's like people. We stay, but we change shape." She smiled faintly. "You're still poetic, even when you're angry." "I'm not angry," he said. Then, after a pause, "Not anymore." They stopped near the rocks, where the waves crashed harder. The fog thinned for a moment, revealing the faint glow of the lighthouse in the distance. Olivia tilted her head back, eyes closed, letting the mist cling to her lashes. "I used to dream about this place," she said quietly. "Even when I was far away, I'd see us walking here, like nothing had broken." "Dreams aren't real," Ethan said, though the words felt hollow even to him. "No," she agreed, "but sometimes they're all we have to keep the real things alive." He looked at her, then really looked and saw the same tenderness he had once fallen in love with. The wind tangled her hair, the dim light traced the edges of her face, and for the first time in years, she didn't look like the woman who had betrayed him. She looked like the woman who had once loved him beyond reason. He wanted to reach for her hand, but didn't. Instead, he said softly, "I don't know what this is, Olivia. I don't know if I can ever go back." "I'm not asking you to," she whispered, "just to be here, now." And so they were, two ghosts relearning how to breathe in the same world. Days turned into weeks. They shared meals, laughter, silences that no longer hurt. Sometimes she stayed late at his house, helping him sort through photographs, her fingers brushing against his as they worked. Once, she fell asleep on the couch, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. He didn't move for hours, afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had found them. But beneath it all, something restless stirred in him. A faint unease that grew each time she looked away too quickly, each time her phone lit up, and she silenced it without a word. He told himself not to care, that trust was a door he had long sealed shut, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. One afternoon, as they walked along the pier, Ethan noticed a shift in her expression. She seemed distant, her laughter forced. The wind tossed her hair into her face, and when he brushed it aside, she flinched barely, but enough for him to notice. "Olivia," he said slowly, "what's wrong?" "Nothing," she replied too quickly. "Just tired." He stopped walking. "Don't do that. Don't hide." Her gaze darted away, toward the gray horizon. "Some things are better left unsaid," she murmured. "Not anymore," Ethan said. His voice was calm, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of fear he couldn't hide. "If we're doing this, whatever this is, I need the truth." She turned to him then, her eyes glistening with something he couldn't name, guilt, maybe, or sorrow too deep to confess. "You think you want the truth," she whispered, "but you don't." The fog thickened around them, swallowing the world until only the sound of the waves remained. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know what hurt more, the possibility that she was lying again, or that he still cared enough for it to matter. They stood there for a long time, neither speaking. The tide crept closer, cold foam curling around their shoes. Finally, Olivia took a step back, her voice trembling. "Ethan," she said, "I came back because I couldn't live with what I did. But there's more I haven't told you. Something I thought I could bury." He stared at her, unable to move. The wind howled, carrying her words into the mist. "What is it?" he asked, but she only shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "Not yet," she whispered. "Please, not yet." And then she turned, walking into the fog, her figure fading with each step until she was gone, leaving him alone on the shore, surrounded by mist and the hollow ache of too many unanswered truths. Ethan stood there long after she vanished, the taste of salt on his lips, the memory of her voice haunting the spaces between waves. The reawakening he had dared to believe in now felt like something fragile and dangerous-like. Light flickering at the edge of a storm. Somewhere in the distance, the lighthouse kept shining, steady and indifferent, cutting through the fog that refused to lift. The storm that night came without warning. The Oregon coast howled beneath sheets of rain, the sky a bruised blur of thunder and electricity. Ethan couldn't sleep. The conversation on the pier had left him restless, his mind replaying Olivia's trembling voice. "There's more I haven't told you." He'd tried to bury it under work, sorting through negatives and editing photographs until his eyes burned. But the unease grew heavier, like the air before lightning. Near midnight, he heard a soft knock on his door. He froze, camera still in his hand. No one ever came by unannounced, especially not this late. When he opened the door, Olivia stood there, soaked, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with exhaustion. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice breaking. He stepped aside. She crossed the threshold like someone surrendering, her body shivering, though the room was warm. Ethan handed her a towel, but she barely noticed, clutching something inside her coat. It took him a moment to realize it was a folded photograph, creased, water-stained old. "You need to know the truth," she said quietly. Ethan hesitated. "Then tell me." She placed the photograph on the table. It was a picture of him taken years ago, before everything shattered. He was smiling in front of their apartment in Seattle. Sunlight caught in his hair. But what startled him wasn't the image, it was the faint handwriting on the back. "Found this online. She still keeps him in her heart." The words hit him like a sudden drop. "What is this?" Olivia sank into the chair, burying her face in her hands. "After you disappeared, I looked for you everywhere. Police, hospitals, even missing persons groups. No one believed me when I said you wouldn't just vanish. Your family thought I was pretending. Your friends stopped answering my calls. I deserved that, I know. But I couldn't stop." Ethan's pulse quickened. He tried to process her words, but his mind kept circling the same question. Why? Why now? Why come back? She looked up, her eyes rimmed red. "The man I was with, Mark, he's dead." The name was one Ethan hadn't heard in years, yet it landed like a stone. "Dead?" "He killed himself." Her voice cracked on the last word. 3 months ago." The room went still. The rain outside softened to a dull whisper. Ethan's breath came slow and shallow. He didn't know what to feel. Shock, pity, disbelief. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's part of why I came," she whispered. "You deserve the truth." She rose, pacing the small living room as if movement could keep her from collapsing. "It wasn't love with him. Not really. I was empty, Ethan. I was drowning in a life that looked perfect, but felt hollow. You were gone all the time on assignments, and I thought I needed something else to feel alive. But it was just noise. I mistook distraction for affection." He said nothing. The sound of her confession fell into the space between them like shards of glass. "When you found out," she continued, her voice trembling, "and disappeared, I thought I deserved it. I thought maybe that was my punishment. But Mark, he couldn't handle the guilt. After you left, he spiraled drugs, lies, paranoia. He used to call me in the middle of the night saying he saw you on the street, that you were haunting him. He thought you'd come back for revenge." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "And did you believe him?" "At first, no. But then he sent me that photo." She gestured toward the table. "He said he found it posted somewhere online, a gallery page with your name on it. But when I looked, the site was gone. It was like you'd left a trace and then erased it. It drove him insane. And when he couldn't find you," she trailed off, staring at the floor, "he took his own life." Ethan leaned against the counter, his hands gripping the edge until his knuckles whitened. "So you came here out of guilt." Her eyes met his, wet and unflinching. "I came because I couldn't live with what I'd done. To you, to him, to myself. I thought if I could find you, maybe I could finally tell the truth. Maybe you could hate me to my face, and I could stop pretending to breathe. He turned away, heart pounding with 1,000 unsaid words. Outside, lightning split the horizon, bathing the room in ghostly light. For a moment, he saw her reflection in the window, small, broken, and painfully human. "Ethan," she whispered, stepping closer, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not even asking for it. But I needed you to know that I never stopped looking. That every day I wondered if you were alive or gone forever. And when I found your name again, on that exhibition flyer, I thought maybe it wasn't too late to face what I ran from." He exhaled, long and slow. "You should have stayed away." "I tried." Her voice cracked like thin ice. "But you were always therein, every photograph I took, every lie I told myself. I thought if I could find you, maybe I could find what was left of me." The silence that followed was unbearable. The storm outside began to fade, replaced by the steady drip of rain from the eaves. Ethan walked to his desk, staring at the half-developed prints pinned to the wall faces, blurred by exposure, landscapes swallowed by mist, images of loss, of things that refused to stay buried. He turned back to her, his voice quieter now. "You think redemption is something you can earn just by showing up? That confessing makes it right?" "No," she said, "but it's all I have." Her tears came freely now, unguarded. "I loved you, Ethan. I still do, but love doesn't erase what I did. I wake up every night hearing him scream, and your silence, it was worse
than punishment. It was like being erased from existence. Ethan's throat ached. He wanted to hate or to let the bitterness he'd carried for years consume him. But all he felt was an exhausted sorrow, deep and hollow. He crossed the room and stood before her. "Mark's death isn't on me," he said finally, "and it's not all on you either. People destroy themselves in different ways." Olivia looked up, eyes wide with grief. "Then why does it still hurt, like I'm the one who died?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the photograph on the table, the one of his younger self smiling into the sun. The handwriting on the back blurred as the paper trembled in his hand. For the first time in years, he saw that man as a stranger. "I don't know what to do with this," he said quietly. "Any of it." "Neither do I," Olivia whispered. "But maybe that's where it starts." They stood there in the dim light, two ghosts bound by a past that refused to rest. The rain outside eased into silence, leaving only the sound of the ocean beyond the cliffs. A low, endless sigh, as if the world itself was trying to forgive. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan felt something shift, not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. The storm returned 3 nights later, heavier than before. The Oregon coastline trembled under the weight of the wind, rain slashing sideways across the small town like shards of glass. Waves hurled themselves against the cliffs with blind fury, and thunder cracked over the darkened sky as if the heavens were splitting open. Inside Ethan's cabin, the air was thick with tension. Olivia stood near the fireplace, her clothes damp, her hair tangled by rain. She hadn't planned to come, but after days of silence following her confession, she couldn't bear the weight of the unspoken anymore. The storm outside seemed a reflection of what churned within her, wild, destructive, inevitable. Ethan was standing by the window, his back to her. The light from the fire cast long shadows across the walls, throwing his face into sharp relief, the set jaw, the distant eyes. He looked both furious and lost. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice rough. "I know," she whispered, "but I had to." He turned, eyes dark with exhaustion. "Had to what? Tear open the wound again? Haven't you done enough?" Olivia flinched, but didn't move. "If I could undo it, I would. But I can't, Ethan. I can only tell you the truth." He laughed, bitter and hollow. "Truth? You think that word still means anything between us?" He stepped closer, rainwater dripping from his hair.
You lied for months. You built a life on deceit, and when it fell apart, you ran to me again. Why? To feel better? To confess and walk away clean? She shook her head, trembling. No, I came because I can't live with it anymore. I came because I still love you. The words hung in the
Air, fragile as glass. The fire crackled behind her, throwing sparks that flickered like dying stars. Ethan stared at her, the same woman he had once held like a prayer, now standing before him like a ghost. He wanted to tell her it was too late, that love couldn't survive what she had done. But the truth was crueler. It had survived, stubbornly, painfully, refusing to die even when he'd begged it to. You don't get to say that, he murmured, voice trembling. You don't get to love me after breaking me. Tears streaked down her face. Then tell me you don't love me anymore. Tell me I mean nothing to you. He closed his eyes. The storm roared outside, shaking the windows as if the world demanded an answer. I can't, he whispered. Her breath caught. Then, but it's not the same, he interrupted. His voice rose, raw and fractured. I do love you, Olivia. God help me. I never stopped. But it's not clean anymore. It's twisted. Every time I look at you, I see what we lost. I see what you did, what I became because of it. He moved toward her, his steps slow but charged with anger and sorrow. Do you have any idea what it's like to love someone you can't forgive? To wake up every day haunted by a memory that used to bring peace? Her lips trembled. Yes, she said, every single day. Ethan stopped inches from her. The thunder outside crashed so loud it shook the floor beneath them. The air smelled of rain and smoke. I tried to hate you, he said. I built my whole life around it. But the more I tried, the more I realized hate is just love that's been starved too long. Olivia's knees gave out. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Her voice came in fragments, broken by guilt and rain. I don't deserve your love. I don't deserve anything from you. But I can't keep breathing knowing what I've done. You were the only real thing in my life, Ethan. The only thing that ever mattered. He knelt beside her, unsure whether to touch her or turn away. Her hands were cold, trembling. She clutched the hem of his shirt like a drowning woman reaching for shore. I've tried to make peace with what I did, she cried. I've gone to therapy, to church, to empty hotel rooms that smelled like regret. But nothing ever quiets it. It's always your face, your silence, your absence. You're the ghost that won't leave me, Ethan. And I don't blame you for haunting me. Ethan felt something in him break, not forgiveness, but the brittle edge of his anger finally giving way to exhaustion. He reached out, his fingers brushing her hair, wet and tangled. She looked up at him with eyes full of ruin, and he saw it all, the guilt, the longing, the years of torment she carried like a wound that never healed. Stop, he whispered. Please stop. I can't, she said through her tears. I've been waiting to hear you say you hate me, but you won't. And that's worse, because it means there's still something left to destroy. He pulled her into his arms without thinking, the motion as natural as breathing. She clung to him, shaking, her sobs muffled against his chest. For a moment, it felt like the past was collapsing in on them, every laughter, every betrayal, every night spent alone staring at the dark ceiling. I don't hate you, Ethan said into her hair. I wish I did. She looked up at him, eyes glistening with the faintest spark of hope. Then what is this? What are we? He shook his head, jaw tight. I don't know. Two people too broken to let go, maybe. The storm outside reached its peak. Lightning flashed through the windows, white and violent, illuminating their faces for a brief, searing instant love and devastation bound together in one impossible frame. Olivia pressed her forehead to his. I would give anything to undo it.
I would burn every lie, every piece of my life before this, if it could bring us back." "You can't," Ethan said. "None of us can." She closed her eyes. "Then let me at least say I'm sorry not to be forgiven, but because you deserve to hear it." He nodded slowly. "Say it." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for breaking what was pure, for leaving you with pieces I could never put back." Ethan's chest ached. "And I'm sorry," he said, "for disappearing instead of fighting, for letting the silence hurt us both." They stayed like that, two souls caught between ruin and remembrance, the storm raging around them like judgment. When the thunder finally softened into a distant echo, the cabin was quiet except for their uneven breathing. Ethan stood, helping her to her feet. Her hands lingered in his for a moment too long before she let go. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice hollow. He looked out the window, at the world drowning in rain. "Maybe nowhere. Maybe this is as far as we get." She nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Then thank you for letting me see you one last time." He didn't stop her when she turned toward the door. The storm had eased, but the air was still heavy with aftermath. As the door closed behind her, Ethan felt the weight of everything: love, loss, the impossible middle ground between them. He stood in the flickering light of the dying fire, listening to the rain fade into silence, and realized that love, once broken, doesn't vanish. It lingers quieter, sadder, but still alive like thunder long after the lightning has gone. The storm had passed. Outside Ethan's small Oregon cabin, the world was drenched in that strange, golden stillness that follows chaos. The air was cold, but clean, as if the rain had washed away not just the salt from the sea, but years of pain clinging to the shore. Inside, the faint hum of silence filled the room, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Ethan stood by the window, camera in hand, the familiar weight of it grounding him. He hadn't slept. The night had been a blur of words, confessions, and tears raw, unguarded. Olivia had fallen asleep on the couch hours ago, her face pale, her lashes still damp from crying. He had watched her as dawn began to bleed through the curtains, not with resentment anymore, not even with love as it once was, but with a deep, weary tenderness. She looked fragile, like a photograph that had been touched too many times, edges fraying, color fading. He raised the camera. The lens focused on her, lying there in the soft morning light. For a long moment, he didn't press the shutter. He simply watched her breathe. It struck him how years of anger and longing had brought them here, to this quiet, inevitable end. When he finally clicked, the sound of the shutter was soft, almost reverent, like a prayer whispered too late. Olivia stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, catching sight of him. She smiled faintly, a tired, broken smile that seemed to hold every apology words had failed to express. "You're leaving," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Ethan hesitated, lowering the camera. "I have to," he replied, his voice hoarse. "If I stay, I'll start believing we can go back. And we can't." She sat up slowly, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to keep from falling apart again. "I know," she whispered, "but I had to find you, even if it was too late. I couldn't let the story end with silence." He looked at her, really looked. The woman before him wasn't the Olivia he'd once known, the brilliant, driven force who commanded boardrooms and turned heads wherever she went. This Olivia was stripped of armor, human, haunted. She had come searching for redemption, but he realized now that forgiveness was not something he could grant. It was something she had to live through. "Do you remember," she said after a long pause, her voice trembling, That morning in Florence, you took my picture while I was reading on the balcony. You said it was the most peaceful I'd ever looked. I remember, Ethan said. He did. The golden light, the way her hair caught the wind, the scent of coffee and paint. He had thought that moment would last forever. Olivia smiled faintly. That was the last time I truly felt free. Ethan exhaled, closing his eyes. Then maybe it's time you find that again, he said quietly. Without me. She looked at him, eyes shining with tears that didn't fall. And you? What will you find? He turned toward the window, where the horizon stretched beyond the fog, endless and uncertain. Peace, he said. Maybe just peace. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of the waves outside filled the silence, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Olivia rose from the couch and walked to him, stopping a few feet away. Thank you, she whispered, for letting me see you one last time, for not hating me anymore. Ethan turned, his expression soft. I don't hate you, Olivia, he said. I just stopped trying to hold what was already gone. She nodded slowly, biting her lip. The words cut deep, but they also freed her. Love had always been a cage between them, beautiful, but confining. Now, standing in the pale dawn, she felt something she hadn't in years. Release. Ethan picked up his bag. The camera hung around his neck, the photograph of her, his last, safely stored within it. He walked toward the door, pausing for just a moment before stepping outside. Ethan, Olivia called softly. He turned. She stood framed in the morning light, hair messy, face still streaked with the remnants of tears. Yet there was a strange beauty in her ruin, the kind of beauty born from truth. This time, she said, her voice breaking, I'll let you go. He smiled faintly, a sad, grateful smile that said everything words couldn't. Then he turned and walked down the worn path leading to the shore. His figure grew smaller against the mist, swallowed slowly by the pale light of morning. Olivia stood at the doorway until she could no longer see him, the echo of his footsteps fading into the sound of the sea. Inside the cabin, the air still carried his presence, the faint scent of cedar, the hum of his camera, the silence that used to feel unbearable, but now felt almost sacred. Olivia walked to the window, her eyes following the horizon. Somewhere out there, Ethan was beginning again. She closed her eyes, whispering to the wind, "Goodbye." The word felt like both an ending and a promise. Outside, the sky brightened. The world, cleansed by rain, shimmered with possibility. Ethan's footsteps disappeared into the distance, but his photograph remained the final image of a love that had burned, shattered, and finally, quietly, set them both free. That morning, Olivia sat by the window as the first light touched her face. She didn't cry. For the first time in years, the ache in her chest was gentle, like a wound finally beginning to heal. The horizon stretched wide before her, and somewhere beyond it, Ethan carried her memory not as a burden, but as a fragment of what once was beautiful, painful, human. And as the sea whispered against the shore, she understood. Sometimes love's truest form is letting go.